Hey everybody, this is Josh Rhodes, and welcome to the Retro Monster Truck Review. Day 2 of Flemington going to be covered right here. Hope you all enjoyed the first episode of this last week. This week continues right on with the Flemington, New Jersey journey as me and Matt Stoltz dive right into it. Quick thank you to everybody that follows on Spotify, as well as gives me 5-star reviews over there on iTunes. And hey, if you're on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe to the video. Hope you all enjoy the podcast. Welcome back, everybody, to the Retro Monster Truck Review. Matt Stoltz again joining me this week. And this week, we're talking Flemington, New Jersey, day number 2 of competition. And Matt, this place, like we had last week, produced some great racing on day 1. What do you think we're going to see in day 2?
I think we're going to pick up where we left off, man. The Flemington track, 2-jump, straight line, low ramps, making for some really good close racing. Bigfoot 8 back in the mix again. First weekend back off the ban, and I think, we'll see the truck perform here. We'll see how it does, and who's going to take the win. We'll have to watch and find out.
Exactly. We're going to have to watch and find out. We start off the episode with a recap of Bigfoot 8 and Equalizer's troubles, and a recap of the USA 1 truck going out and getting its final televised win. Kind of interesting note here that Army interviews Steve Wilkie with a Kyosho USA 1 on the tire right behind him. For those RC geeks out there, that was the USA 1 truck that came out to kind of rival the Clodbuster back in the day. It's kind of cool to see one of those brand new Kyosho trucks just sitting there, especially with the re-release coming.
For sure. They sold that truck up through like 2001, 2002, somewhere in there. That truck was out for a long time. The Clodbuster's still kind of the reigning king. It's been selling now for 34 years straight, but the Kyosho USA 1, which was, paired off the Double Dare chassis, had a long run also, and you can't ignore the success of that vehicle, and there's still a lot of purveying love for that truck out there, and it's got to be one of the reasons they brought the truck back with the new release, because people still remember it and have fond memories. So I definitely am purchasing a new one. How about you?
I'm probably going to end up getting one myself. You know me, I've got a hobby shop full of monster trucks. Ain't going to hurt nothing to have one more.
That's right.
We get a little bit of a recap here, an interview with Steve Wilkie. And what I like from Army here is another great Army-ism. Like the Phoenix, it came back from the grave, referring to the USA 1 after the Richmond incident that it had. And for those that don't know, USA 1 in Richmond had a horrible crash and basically ripped the whole front end assembly underneath the truck, axle, tires, everything, you name it, was gone, and they had to repair this truck to get it back. And there's more on that in our first episode, Flemington Day number 1. Moving right along here, though, we get to discuss the lukewarm return of Bigfoot number 8, and Andy Brass basically says, hey, we weren't happy with what we had yesterday on the track.
Yeah, Andy had some struggles in night number 1, and if you're new to the Retro Monster Truck Review, we invite you to go back, listen to week number 1 of this Flemington show, because we went really in depth with a lot of the issues that Bigfoot 8 had that first night in competition. These nights are back-to-back events, so they didn't really have a whole lot of time to figure out what necessarily was wrong with the truck, if anything. The purveying theory at this point seems to be that the cars are the issue and the lanes are the issue. So we'll see if that changes at all for night number 2 with a little bit different setup. I'm not sure. I don't think they replaced many of the cars, but we'll take a look here as we get into qualifying.
It doesn't look like they replaced many of the cars. What they did on Bigfoot, though, is interesting. It seems like they basically locked the rear end. And to put it in an RC monster truck guy's terms, we lock the rear end on our trucks most of the time to go racing as far as the pro modified trucks and the sport modified trucks. Basically, Bigfoot took the rear steering out to try and attempt to get the truck to drive straight down the track.
Yeah, I think Andy said that they were worried about some of the seals and stuff had been worn out in the steering system and were allowing some fluid to go through into the cylinders and let the truck turn. I'm not sure if that was the issue, but again, this is as it's happening. They didn't have a lot of data to go off of, so you have to eliminate what you think you can eliminate. Make sure that rear end's locked up tight and solid. They put a solid bar in there of some kind, I guess, or pin through it to lock it shut. Porter and all them guys did that back then for straight line racing. So it was kind of interesting to see that the Bigfoot team hadn't locked the rear steer out initially on 8. for these long straight tracks. I guess they must have left it open for maneuverability in the pits, but all bets are off now. They're going to make sure it's locked up tight.
Yeah, and they certainly prove the truck is locked up tight when they go out in qualifying here against Buffalo Tremor. Tremor has a good pass at a 6.76, but Bigfoot in that left lane in qualifying this time doesn't have a bobble in between the cars like it did the day before in its penalty rerun. This time, Bigfoot gets clean down the track, and one of the fastest passes Flemington is probably ever going to see at a 6.03 for Bigfoot 8.
A fast run for 8, but I'm going to have to point out, Josh, I still don't think he got all of the truck all the way down the track. He had to get out of it a little bit coming off that first set still.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to do that anyway, I think, regardless. But as far as point A to point B pass, that's easily the fastest pass of the weekend right there.
It's a pretty fast one. I think he left a little on the table yet, though. You can see the truck kind of dips a little bit off that first set. He definitely shoots it over the second set, though. The truck still unloads after the finish line, but at that point, the run's over. You don't have to worry about it.
Equalizer in USA 1 up next here. Wilkie puts in a smooth run at a 7-second pass, which actually surprised me was slower than Buffalo Tremor, but still USA 1 putting down a good point A to B pass. The big issue is in the right lane with Equalizer having a major transmission issue. Truck does not get down the track. He goes over the first set of cars, and Greg pulls off to the right and basically says, hey, second day in a row, we're going to have to do another pass and do another penalty run.
I find it an interesting strategy that Greg must have thought that they could get the truck fixed and make a faster run with the penalty than what he was going to run there, because he pulls the truck off to the side and purposely misses the second set of cars. I'm assuming that it was going through his mind at that point, that we could get this fixed and come back and run quicker with the penalty, being that he had a penalty the night before. He knew the situation. So whatever transmission issue they had, I'm sure they got to work on it, tried to figure it out. And I experienced a similar thing a couple weeks ago. I was in Brookville, PA at a Renegade show, and Saigon Shaker was having some tranny issues, and they worked on it, thought they had it figured out, and things kind of went the same way that they did for Equalizer on this night. We'll have to see what Greg does in his second run.
Yep. Next out was King Crunch and Outlaw. Army asked Scott about rolling up through the ramps over the Racing Electronics radio here, and basically Scott says, hey, he does it basically to try to keep the truck straight and get a nice straight launch off of the line. It's interesting to note that they start talking about this at the start of the episode, and this becomes an issue later on through this whole racing bracket with Scott Stevens. It seems like everybody's doing it to him.
A lot of mind games. I mean, Scott would play with guys, and I guess they'd play with him back, but, sometimes the mind starts to fail you, and we see that here in this qualifying run. What happened to King Crunch?
Yeah, he doesn't move. The best part of this is after everything's over with, Outlaw puts down a really good pass at a 6.82, but King Crunch at a 9.23. Basically, Scott doesn't move off the line. What happened? He got out of his routine. He forgot to put the truck in drive.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate shot there. Cost him a few seconds. And what I like about the Outlaws run, he has a little bit of trouble getting slowed down. He dirt tracks that thing into the pits.
Oh, yeah. There's a little bit of that on this entire night, basically. They're having a lot of problems getting these trucks stopped. And we covered this all the way back in our Dallas episode when I had Doug on the show. The trucks were having a lot of trouble then getting stopped, and they're still having a lot of trouble getting stopped here in Flemington. Those cars at the end of the track are going to see some abuse, and they have already this weekend.
Yeah, last week we were talking about USA 1, and I have to issue a correction on myself. USA 1 was running pinion brakes. I think we were talking about possibility of hub brakes last week, but USA 1 was running pinion brakes, but the straight 5-ton still not providing them as much reduction advantage on those pinion brakes as some of the other trucks. So still having some trouble getting shut down the USA 1 truck. I think he may have some more issues by the end of the weekend here, but Scott had no problem getting slowed down because he wasn't going that fast at the end of this qualifying run. He talks with Chris, and he says, boy, brain fade, forgot to put the truck in drive.
Yep. You mentioned No Problem right there. Guess what truck's out next? No Problem and John Moore. And in the other lane, as Army Armstrong would say, it's the old red light bandit, Gravedigger, number 2, pulling up to the line here against No Problem. And as you put in your notes, red lights are on, so that must mean that Gravedigger is 100%.
Gotta be 100% with the red headlights on, and with some breakage the night before, Dennis looked like he had most of the field covered with the troubles that Bigfoot and Equalizer were having the first night. So it's unfortunate Dennis couldn't capitalize. How does he do here in this qualifying run, Josh?
Amazing. Digger comes out and runs, I believe, the second quickest qualifying time, 6.46, second fastest overall, a 6.76 for no problem, which is not a slouch run either. Both these trucks are running great. Both of them got to a point A and point B pass very well. Dennis seems like he's going to have a little bit of an issue getting shut down, like we were talking about earlier. He goes right straight, makes a left turn straight for the pits right after he lands.
It speaks to the competition level here as we get later into this 1990 season. Almost all of the trucks, save the guys that had issues, are all running within like a second across the whole field on a track this long. That's very, very impressive.
Yeah. One thing I got to point out here is one of my favorite quotes that I heard from Army Armstrong here is Dennis kind of gets slowed down to make that left turn to the pits. Army almost yells, "Left turn, Clyde," as Dennis is trying to wheel that thing around and get it back to the pit area.
Left turn, right turn, Clyde, and left turn, Clyde, and we always did a right turn, Fred, when we were given directions in the car. So maybe that's the other side of it. But great run for both trucks. Army says it just may be the night for the Gravedigger here. We'll see how that plays out with that prediction throughout the brackets.
One thing Army does point out here is Dennis knows he can go straight, but does Bigfoot 8 know that? That is the big question mark. I agree 100% right here. There's a big, big, big question mark and cloud hanging over that Bigfoot camp over there, and whether or not that truck can actually stay straight. They've proved it can at least once tonight. Can it maintain it through the rest of the bracket? That is the big question.
Yeah, the big unknown with Bigfoot 8 right now, will it go straight? The Digger's looking awful good. These guys may be on a collision course. We'll have to see. But in the meantime, we got to make up a penalty run here from the Equalizer.
The Equalizer gets its rerun, and again, something goes wrong here. It looks like the transmission line blows, and all of a sudden, there's a big fire back there. Army Armstrong points out just how smart Greg Holbrook is to drive this out to the finish line. Otherwise, the fire could have gotten underneath the driver's compartment and really got to Greg right there. Man, it's just tough break after tough break for Equalizer, and it makes you wonder if old Gary Cook back there is eating his words from the previous day.
Well, as they come back from the next commercial break here after qualifying, Scott Douglas points out the irony of Gary Cook bragging about the truck's reliability. And, boy, it really came back to bite him here in Flemington.
That it did. We go into round one pairings right here. No shock. Bigfoot, number 1 qualifier, going to be taking on number 7 Nightlife. Buffalo Tremor and number 11 King Crunch. Carolina Crusher at number 3 with Wild Hair at number 9. No Problem going to be taking on Clydesdale for the number 10 matchup there. A number 6 and 12 matchup, Outlaw and Equalizer. And then the number 2 qualifier, Gravedigger, going to be taking on USA 1. And that, my friend, is the one that I have circled to watch in this matchup.
Oh, for sure. Anytime those two guys go up against each other, it's going to be a war. Dennis with a number 2 spot thinks, maybe I'm going to draw a half-decent number. He draws the USA 1 in round number 1.
One thing to note here, too, about USA 1 is, yes, it did win the day before, but it also was in round number 1 and goes out in round number 1, but comes back as a fast loser and eventually wins the whole bracket, but it met up with a faster truck in round number 1, and that could be another issue here for USA 1. I'm not sure why in qualifying it seems like Wilkie is kind of backing off the pedal a little bit.
I'm not sure here, but you know what? We're looking at the round number 1 matchups, and I don't see any bad races on paper here. A lot of competition. Again, we're talking the 12 top trucks on the TNT Tour at this point. It's just amazing the competition level that they brought out here to the East Coast.
I agree 100% with you right there. A lot of consistent trucks and a lot of fast trucks. It always makes for a good bracket because you never know who's going to pull out a win, except maybe in this pair. We get Bigfoot and Nightlife. Bigfoot, another straight, fast, awesome run, wins by 2 lengths over the Nightlife truck, which I might add is a brand new truck for this year as well for Dave Wysoric. But consistency pays off. The truck goes from point A to point B, and he's going to come back as a fast loser. The issue is he just ran into a faster truck.
Yeah, if Bigfoot had made any kind of mistake, I think Wysoric would have been on top of him there. But a laser straight shot from Bigfoot, it looks like the truck's working finally.
Yeah, and Army mentions to Andy that the truck is driving straight, and Andy says that he doesn't mind working as long as it goes straight. Army points out in the replay what he's talking about right there, and that's the fact that if you watch this replay that Tough Tracks has, a nice close-up shot, you can see Andy is straight up wheeling this truck right now to keep that thing straight.
Yeah, and you know what? I just did a quick little measurement with a stopwatch here. I'm pulling this time in at under 6 seconds.
No, I wish I would have went back and actually timed it myself here, but man, he had a heck of a run there against Nightlife, and basically Dave Wysoric wasn't even in this race from the start.
Yeah, it's probably the two truck length win, I'd say, overall. But with as fast as this track is, like we said, if Bigfoot makes any mistake or has any handling issues, I think Wysoric would have taken him still. Not a bad run out of the Nightlife Chevrolet.
Oh no, not a bad run at all. Like I said, it's going to bring Dave back as a quick loser. But again, he just ran into a faster truck in round number one. And when you're taking on a fast qualifier, especially one as capable as that Bigfoot 8 truck, I mean, that's basically all you can hope for at that point is that truck makes a mistake.
For sure. And I think this is the one run so far that Andy's been able to stay in the throttle the entire time, start to finish, and it shows on the time clock. There's just no beating that truck in that situation.
Yeah, and think about this. Bigfoot 8 had all those issues in the right lane. Now it has lane choice the entire evening.
Yes, indeed. And, not to go too far off track, but we're talking about the handling issues of Bigfoot 8 throughout these two episodes. And, we have to remember there's another newer truck out already by this point. Bigfoot 9's out campaigning around the country with Jim Kramer, and that's an even lighter truck. It launches even harder. Could you imagine, Josh, had they been allowed to do more than one chassis change throughout the year, if Bigfoot 9 would have run any TNT races on this tour, it'd have been unstoppable.
Yeah, it might have been right there as far as some of the quickest times we'd ever seen in the sport to that point if 9 had been able to compete in TNT Motorsports. Instead, they bring back here Bigfoot 8, and man, 8 puts on a show in round number 1 and in qualifying for everybody.
Oh, for sure. Everybody wants to see the big blue Ford in town. Andy doing a good job here. And, the next race, what do we got here? King Crunch versus Buffalo Tremor, looks like.
Yeah, you talk about big blue Fords. Well, there's a big blue Chevrolet over there with auto value written on the side of it that thinks it's the number 1 truck in the country. And I got to tell you, Kevin Ford on the team radio, Kevin basically says Scott got rushed on the line in qualifying, and he thinks he's going to do a lot better here. And after the race is over with, yes, King Crunch does go on to take the win here, but we get the famous quote from Scott Stevens again. Did we win?
Yeah, and another close race that would prompt him to ask that question. Both trucks doing really, really well. No real mistakes that I can point out from either driver at this point. Buffalo Tremor always comes in hard on the top end. I would say that King Crunch definitely got just a little bit of a hole shot, but coming on the finish, you could see Buffalo Tremor's making up a little bit of time, but just not quite enough. King Crunch with the win.
Yep, Johnny K loses by 0.03 of a second, and he's actually not mad at this. He thought it was very good, saying he's going to come out here with some of these newer trucks and run that well. He's pretty happy with the run. Unfortunately, this is the last time you're going to see Buffalo Tremor on the night.
Yeah, Tremor's out with wasn't able to be the fast loser. You hate to go out on such a tight race like that, but he gave it his all, and the Tremor was still running pretty good.
Before we scoot on to the next race here, I got to point out, after Scott asks, did we win? Kevin says, yeah, what are you doing at the finish? And Scott exclaims, I was hanging out.
Yeah, them guys are having fun on the radios for sure. And, we're watching the Tough Tracks version of this show here as we do our commentary. But as we talked about in the first week, this show was broadcast on 3 different networks. You had your Tough Tracks syndicated show on affiliates all over the country, local markets. You had the ESPN show Monster Truck Challenge, which was a half-hour condensed version of Tough Tracks, and also Trucks and Tractor Power on TNN Sunday mornings with the Diamond P crew doing some more different camera angles and editing. They had a camera on Kevin Ford at the finish line. So when you're done watching our Tough Tracks version that we're talking about, go back and watch that show as well, because there's some other interesting different stuff that they cover on that show. The action's all the same, but some different camera angles. You could see how Kevin's talking to him throughout the pre-race and post-race radio calls. It's all synced up with the audio there, so you get to see his side of the conversation as well. Just wanted to point that out to the listeners. We obviously are going to post the video link with the podcast here for the Tough Tracks edition, so we want to give everybody as much monster truck content as possible.
Yep, and I got to tell you, the Trucks and Tractor Power episode was one that you actually sent to me earlier as we were discussing a certain thing we're going to talk about here in a little bit. but the camera angle and the camera was just a little bit different, and maybe a different frame rate or something. But for some reason, the video quality was extremely good for the Trucks and Tractor Power episode, and you could point out and you could see a lot more in that particular episode as well.
Yeah, at least on the YouTube uploads here that we're watching, they were uploaded at different times. I'm not sure if the source feed was any different for the master tapes they were using, but in terms of what we can watch here today on the internet, what we have available to us, that video is a little more clear. So we'll definitely get into that in a little bit.
Next round, we have to point out first pairing that we're going to see: Bigfoot 8 and King Crunch.
Boy, the drama of 1990 TNT Monster Trucks is going to come to a head in that matchup in round number 2 for sure.
Exactly. Wild Hair and King Crunch is up next. Two of the oldest trucks on the circuit right here. But Carolina Crusher 2 might be one of the oldest trucks on the circuit, but it is still one of the most consistent out there, still sitting third in points going into this race. Wild Hair is going to get out of shape over the first set of cars and is bouncing pretty bad going into the second set here, and that's exactly where Gary Porter and Carolina Crusher just hits the afterburners and flies right past him. But up until that point, when Wild Hair starts bouncing, they were pretty much dead even.
Yeah, I think, Marvin gets a little out of shape here before the second set and has to back out of it. I think that's the difference here. Both trucks running good. Carolina Crusher running hard as some of the last few events for that vehicle, as Gary's getting ready to debut his new truck on the circuit. But you can look at the end zone shot here on the TV feed, and Wild Hair had to overcorrect in that middle section. I think that's where the difference is.
Yeah, one thing I have to ask here, though, is Marvin does say that he backed out by a hair, and inquiring minds have to know, Matt, did he in fact back out of a wild hair or just a regular hair?
I'm gonna say a blonde one. Just a hair. When you're moving a machine that big anyway, if you get out of the throttle at all, you're gonna call it just a hair. But he got his foot back in it for sure, and just wasn't quite enough to take over the consistency of Gary Porter and the Carolina Crusher.
Yeah, and we go to a commercial right here, but the interesting thing to point out is there's somebody over from Bigfoot helping out Greg Holbrook, and that's John Pyant helping Greg Holbrook work on Equalizer before we go to commercial right here, and that shows you the camaraderie in monster truck racing.
Yeah, you got the two top teams in the points race, and when things are behind the scenes and when you're not on that starting line, everybody's still working together. You got to put on a show for the fans, got to make sure everybody makes it to the line. Everybody's helping everybody out. It's a good thing to see.
That's one thing that makes monster truck racing special, is the fact that if you're going to beat somebody, you want to beat them on the line. You don't want to have that competitor miss out or miss a round.
Yeah, and it speaks even more to these guys because they're racing for purse money. You would think that you'd want to get every advantage that you can. Maybe today's society is a little bit different with how competitive people are, but back in 1990, it was all hands on deck. We got to make sure that we get everybody to the line, and we'll settle it on the racetrack.
We go back to racing here. Clydesdale and No Problem taking on each other. The wheelbase mentioned from Army Armstrong, of course, with Clydesdale having longest wheelbase on the circuit. No Problem always having the shortest wheelbase on the circuit. Clydesdale's going to get out of shape here and have a disqualification. Not sure what was going on with Bennett this weekend. Maybe a slower steering box than normal in the truck. That's the only thing I could think of. But he just can't keep that thing straight, and John Moore goes from point A to point B just like he has all night long.
Yeah, so Bennett, I don't think he made a legal run in competition either night of racing. He manages to get DQ'd again. That puts him out for the night because you can't come back as a fast loser in that case. So Bennett, man, having a rough 1990 through this point. And it seems like these two trucks always manage to match up against each other somehow. But we got those wheelbase mentions a lot from Army throughout the season.
Oh, yeah, you got those from Army throughout his entire career as far as wheelbase stuff goes. Curse of the right lane here, though. Bennett does get that left front tire down into that hole that we were talking about on day number 1, and that's really what causes the issue, and he just can't get it back straight at all. And Bennett's obviously upset here. He just couldn't get it turned back around, or couldn't get it turned in time. Second week in a row from him, and he's not happy as far as when he's interviewed by Chris Chapman here.
Yeah, and what's amazing is they put a graphic up here after the replay that shows the curse of the right lane and the big hole that's in that set of cars. it looks like the car still has, part of an engine in it, I guess, but a big enough hole that it's causing issues. I think it's the next to the last car in that first set that they're showing here. I just found it interesting. They're calling it the curse of the right lane, and they even did a little graphic for it before the interview with Bennett. I thought it was kind of cool.
Outlaw is going to get a buy run right here. It looks like Gary Cook could not get the transmission changed out quick enough for equalizer. One thing to point out here is they basically asked Gary what's going on, and he says, well, I guess I shouldn't have opened my mouth the day before and said how reliable things were, because that's probably what's causing the problems. He says that's just racing luck, as he's kind of joking right there. But he also explains that they're probably going to lose some points tonight.
Well, they may lose some points tonight. The Bigfoot's already moved on beyond round number 1, so the points gap is going to shrink a little bit. The question is how much.
USA 1 and Gravedigger right here. Number 8 and number 2 in qualifying going to match up. Every single time these trucks paired against each other in TNT, it was usually the show of the entire bracket. This race is absolutely no exception right here, as it looks like Wilkie gets a little bit of a hole shot. He holds that little bit of a lead all the way through this race, right up until Dennis hits the second ramp. And Dennis actually scoots past him by maybe a red headlight at the finish line. One of the closest races you saw in Flemington.
This is just an amazing race start to finish. I can't really tell who's in the lead at any point for most of this race, but I think the difference, if I had to point it out, at least the best that I can tell, it's that darn curse of the right lane again. It just kicked USA 1 up enough to where he bounced one little time in no man's land and couldn't quite get the power down as well as Digger because the front end comes back up. Dennis is also really fighting the truck through no man's land. He's got the wheel cranked to the right heading to the second set, and I think it kind of actually helps him because he doesn't get square on the cars. He does make a legal run, but the angle is a little bit lower of the trajectory, and I think that might have been just enough to get him ahead of USA 1 at the finish line, as you said, by a red headlight.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the closest races you're going to see in TNT all season long. It kind of harkens back to another matchup that I thought of in my head, and that was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, between these two, where Dennis was on kill and he wanted to take out, quote, the white truck, and he did just that, but ended up breaking. This time, Dennis doesn't break, and Digger's ready to go for round number 2.
Yeah, they're both running hard, and you see USA 1 able to kind of almost get it shut down. He just taps one of those catch cars against the fence this time, and Dennis made that hard left turn to the pits again. If you're in the left lane, that's kind of an advantage for you as well in the shutdown area. He doesn't stop till he's halfway into the pits.
Yeah, Dennis looks like one of those guys that's out there flat tracking on a motorcycle trying to make that corner. He's just spinning that thing around as quick as he can around that guardrail to try to get back to the pit area.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, as hard as these guys ran, and I'd have to say they both gave 100% run. I'm going to say that straight out. But Dennis says in his post-race interview that he's got a little more juice left just in case he has to face Wilkie again. I don't know if that's maybe a little bit of theater out of Dennis here, but maybe he was taking it just a hair easy to not break the truck. When you get Dennis running at 95% and he's winning, boy, those are the nights that really works out for him, isn't it?
Yeah, that's usually how it works out for Dennis. Whenever he takes just a little bit of thought to pull that foot right back off the pedal just a little bit. That's usually when Dennis Anderson's Gravedigger is running at 100%, if it makes sense.
Yeah, 95% is 100% in this case.
Exactly.
Dennis can run the truck at 100, but the truck can't hold that 100% a lot of times. So, I find it interesting that he said he had some left in the tank, but we'll see if he has to use it here.
To point out too, Dennis hasn't really had a bad run this entire weekend. He was number 1 qualifier the day before. He had lane choice the entire night. Unfortunately, has breakage in round number 1, but the truck still gets from, like I said, I keep saying point A to point B. That's what the truck's doing. It's going point A to point B, and it's doing it very quickly. He's second quickest qualifier here, and he has a great first round race with USA 1. Dennis's truck, although it broke the night before, still seems like it is either one or two, first or second quickest the entire the weekend here.
It's going fast, and importantly, it's bouncing straight, it's moving straight, and Dennis has given up probably a few thousand pounds to USA 1 here. We talk again, USA 1 not running planetaries, and Digger has got real heavy Firestone steel shield tires on that truck. The truck itself, has a reinforced frame, whereas USA 1 is more of a conventional frame that just has some gusseting done to it. So USA 1, I think I've read some figures, was in the 11,000, 11,500 range. Digger's got to be pushing close to 14,000 pounds here. I don't think he has the fiberglass body on yet. So, you know, it's amazing that Dennis could get the performance out of the truck that he did, because he was at a disadvantage on just about all counts except for that right foot.
Yeah, and one thing I got to point out here too is Digger 2 always seems to get a lot of miscredit out there as far as I'm concerned, of just being a truck that was kind of unreliable for Dennis Anderson. Boy, when this truck worked, it was probably one of the best trucks in TNT Motorsports that was ever built, as far as I'm concerned. Don't even try to comment me on the comments and try and tell me otherwise. I still think Digger 2 is one of the greatest leaf sprung trucks ever built.
I'd agree there. And, a lot of the issues that Dennis had were little mechanical gremlins that really shouldn't have happened. I'm thinking back to let's see here, in Memphis, he had a steering pump failure that put him out one night. That's not something that's usually due to abuse or anything. It happened after introduction. So, just weird things that happen to the Digger a lot of times, a lot of transmission issues. If you could point out a weak spot in Dennis's program, it was probably the drive line through these 2 years of TNT competition where Digger 2 ran. I've got visions of drive shafts slinging out in Buffalo, New York on a huge jump. And, a lot of issues.
I think of Louisville. I can't remember if it was 89 or 90 where Dennis jumps, lands, and the left side of the truck kicks up, and you just saw parts flying out from underneath the truck.
Yeah, that's in 90. A lot of the issues are just Dennis didn't have any fear of hitting those ramps full speed, and sometimes the truck didn't hold up, but I think the track here in Flemington plays to Dennis's strengths. He can stay in the throttle the whole time. They're not getting that big huge up in the air where you're getting the deflection out of the suspension and jamming the drive shafts up into the transfer case or anything with some of the geometry angles, and that means the Digger's going to have a good night. If you think back the nights where he had a lot of success, Richmond, Virginia, the ramps were a little steeper, but it was still kind of a low slung track there 2 years in a row. Dennis had big success there. Some of the indoor tracks with lower ramps where Dennis wasn't skying the truck out, he ends up the winner. So there's definitely environments where Dennis had an advantage, and I think this is one of them.
Yeah, we move on to round number 2 here. And man, I got to tell you, Bigfoot King Crunch pulling the line. This is probably the rivalry as far as TNT goes this particular season, is these two blue trucks. One's a Chevrolet, one's a Ford. One is from Texas, one's from the St. Louis, Missouri area. One team thinks that they're a crybaby, the other thinks that they're spoiled rich kids.
Yeah, and we're talking about a lot of this controversy here, and I think TNT and the Tough Tracks production guys missed out on one little thing. It would have been really cool to do an establishing shot coming back from commercial with a close-up of that anti-lawsuit sticker that was on the front of King Crunch. I think that would have been a cool way to set this up while they're doing the commentary, but who am I? Just a backseat production guy 30 years later talking about it on the internet. But it's definitely going to be a matchup where both guys are out for blood.
And one of them is going to end up black and blue as far as Army's concerned. He says both of them trucks are painted blue, but somebody's coming out of this thing with black and blue on their paint scheme. Both drivers are playing mind games at the line, not going in the stage. Army says they look like they're square dancing out there. Everybody's do-si-doing, but nobody's going to the starting line.
Yeah, Andy always was playing mind games on the line whenever he could, and he does something here that I think that ends up in the Penda days being illegal. But I guess it was still allowed here. Scott goes into stage. Andy's already there. And then Andy rolls through the lights again. He pulls forward and then back after the guys are already staged. I don't know if that was, just another little trick. But you see the starter's got his arm up, like ready to give him the thumbs up. And Andy just pulls up to the cars again.
Yeah, Andy's just like, oh, wait, you want us to start? Hang on 1 second. Let me get straight.
and we haven't covered this event on the Retro Monster Truck review, but I think it was Canfield, one of the shows in '96. Eric Meager backed out of the lights when they were already staged and ended up getting a DQ called on him. Gave the win in the finals to Alan Pizzo and Predator because you weren't allowed to do that. There were competition rules in the MTRA rulebook by that point that disallowed things like this, burning a guy down on the starting line. So maybe something like this, if it happened enough, it was a reason why they put that in the rule book. But I found it interesting here. Andy backs out of the staging lights and doesn't get a penalty called on him, at least at this point.
Yeah, Scott Stevens says over the radio, yeah, me and Andy, We almost melt each other's motors down playing games with one another. Scott finally goes into the line. Like you said, Andy rolls through, backs up, and then restages himself yet again. When they leave the first set of cars, though, there's something definitely wrong in the left lane for Bigfoot. The truck starts to slide to the right a little bit, which is interesting because the day before it seemed like the truck wanted to do the same thing, but in the other lane.
Yeah, the camera angle isn't great. It's a low angle shot here of when it happens. It's hard to kind of tell what causes it. The run before, I think Andy was a little bit further left on the cars as he came off, so I don't know if he hit another hole somewhere in the cars that he wasn't prepared for, because he seems kind of dead center on the cars, but it definitely bounces to the right. It doesn't hook to the right upon landing necessarily. He's in the air coming down facing to the right, and you could see Andy physically get on the brakes in no man's land, and that's when Scott just kind of goes by him.
Yeah, Scott drives right past him as he's flying through the air. Over the radio, we hear Scott just exclaim, "Thank you, Kevin," before saying the motor laid down. Like he's really happy, and then all of a sudden he's right back into race mode saying, "Hey, the motor laid down."
Yeah, the trucks are probably running hot at that point. Alcohol engines, the longer you run them at idle, they seem to build the heat then because you're not pushing enough fuel through them.
The trouble here for Andy after he jumps, though, is the fact that the truck veers hard left off of the second set of cars, actually DQs himself, and ends up sliding right, as you said, over the tops of the cars and bumps the left front tire into the guardrail at the side of the track over there. A rough run for Bigfoot.
You could see the fight in Andy as he's going through this race. He does not give up at any point until he's through that finish line. He had the foot on the throttle across that whole set of cars, and man, he was even making up time, I think, a little bit against King Crunch over that second set of cars, kind of going sideways, but just wasn't enough.
No, not enough at all. Like we said, King Crunch and Scott Stevens are incredibly happy right here because they know they've just taken out the truck that pretty much had the stranglehold on, number one, the good lane, and number two, probably the best truck in the field, mechanic-wise. The truck is like I said, one of the best trucks ever built, and King Crunch just took it out right here. And Stevens, right before he goes back to the pits, truck of the future right there, the old Out of Value Special, just keeps putting him on the trailer.
That's it. And we see Chris again. Chris, as we said last week, seems like she always interviews the loser after the race, a trend that I noticed. And Andy gets out, and boy, Andy had to have had a chiropractor on site or something to be able to stretch to get out of that truck the way that he did. You kind of have to be a contortionist. He hops out and says, yeah, there were a lot of mind games there, but we just didn't have enough.
Yeah, and the crunch of the week is the old. I have to say it. It sounds like the Unbelievable from Cleveland '87 when we covered that. There's just no emotion in this crunch of the week Nintendo voiceover whatsoever. And then we see that the crunch of the week is in fact Bigfoot bumping the guardrail. I mean, it's a barely bump, but when you look at the ride it took to get there, it's a wonder Bigfoot 8 didn't go for an even wilder ride.
Yeah, and this Crunch of the Week voiceover guy is kind of intriguing to me because it almost sounds like it was kind of spliced in afterward. Just kind of something that sounded weird to me. I'm not sure if they had different voiceovers that they plugged in depending on what Nintendo was, doing at different times or whatever the sponsor was when it originally aired versus when it aired this time. But it definitely sounds like it was like added in over top of something.
When Bigfoot smacks the retaining wall, you know it's time for the Crunch of the Week.
The Crunch of the Week is brought to you by Nintendo. With Nintendo, you're playing with power.
Yeah, and it's just a weird voice. A lot of accentuation on some parts of words that shouldn't be accentuated upon. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, and we didn't really touch on this in the last episode, but it was kind of the same thing on there as well. But even more interesting, and this will be an Easter egg for those of you who are listening to this episode and you go back to watch the first one, the Crunch of the Week and Power Drive, I forget which one it was, the graphic there was actually the one they used during the 91 season when GRB had the show Tough Tracks and Super Tracks on TV. So I think they re-aired these a couple times and maybe updated some graphics and some overlays at different points. But you could take a look. This one here on show 2 that we're going to post the YouTube link, it's the original Crunch of the Week graphic with the different voiceover.
Next race up here, Nightlife and Carolina Crusher. Nightlife fast loser from round number 1. Kind of gets the unfortunate task here of taking on Gary Porter. Two of the most consistent trucks on the TNT's tour, though, here, Matt. I mean, it could very well be a toss-up between these two, honestly.
Well, and we saw USA 1 come back from the loser bracket and race number 1 take the whole event victory. So, two consistent running GM products here. The Carolina Crusher sitting pretty tall. Nightlife a little more low slung. Who's going to have the advantage?
Looks like it's going to be the taller truck that has the advantage, even though Nightlife gets a little bit of the hole shot. But Carolina Crusher comes back over the second set, actually kind of passes Nightlife just before the first jump or the second jump here, and is going to take about a half a truck length victory. And Scott actually mentions that that all these other trucks seem to be braking, but Carolina Crusher doesn't brake too often. I wonder, though, which trucks he's kind of referring to, because we really only had one, maybe two mechanical failures this entire evening.
Yeah, and Gary's truck really was consistent, especially in a lot of the non-TV shows. He made a lot of final rounds there as well. He was always ready to go when called upon. So, Crusher getting the job done here again. And we go down to his interview with Army, and Gary says he's staying in that left lane, but the right lane has come around. And, we're talking about all the issues with Bigfoot 8 and the lighter trucks and some of the trucks bouncing in that right lane. But Gary's truck's heavy, and it'll plow right through that hole in the cars if he needs to, I guess.
Yeah, and that's kind of what he's counting on, I think, is that the right lane, he's just going to be able to plow through that hole. Speaking of trucks that want to try and plow through that hole, is going to be USA 1 and No Problem here. And on paper, this seems like a no contest matchup between USA 1 and No Problem. White Truck's going to win all day on paper, but in real life, it seems like in this particular sense of the competition, I think No Problem's got the edge.
Yeah, USA 1 lines up in that right lane. I'm not sure who had the higher qualifying time. You may have to bail me out on that one, Josh. But
It'd be actually No Problem. USA 1 was a fast loser. It was number 8. No Problem had the quicker time. It actually ran with Gravedigger.
Well, there you go. So No Problem getting the lane choice then, going into that left lane preferred. And this is the time in the season where John Moore and No Problem really start showing their muscle on the TNT Tour. Later on in Stafford, they call him the Giant Killer because he takes out all the top guys on that weekend. That's just a few weeks after this show here in Flemington. So, No Problem kind of gets a bad start here. The truck lurches hard left off the line, but he gets it corrected. And between that and a bad bounce from USA 1, he comes back.
Yeah, he comes back, and John Moore's going to go ahead and take the win right here. Wilkie, though, it's noted afterwards, he's actually running in two-wheel drive in this pass, and honestly, it kind of shows, because after that first set of cars, it seems like the front end is just bouncing, and when he hits the second set of cars, the truck goes up into a bit almost of a wheel stand, whereas No Problem and John Moore is riding straight as an arrow over the cars, and that's where he gets the win, is just driving straight as an arrow, and again, point A to point B.
Yeah, and you can kind of tell that the truck is in two-wheel drive here in USA 1 because the front end's not digging as it's bouncing through no man's land. I think the bounce isn't as big had he had the front drive, and you and I have talked about it here on the Retro Monster Truck review. You don't want to run that truck in two-wheel drive if you can help it, but they're going for the points, they're going for the money, and I guess they let them run. We saw a couple years later in Columbus an episode that we've covered here on the podcast where they didn't want to let him run in two-wheel drive, the Taurus team. So, they were learning and figuring things out with what they should allow and not allow. But it seemed like TNT, at least in these outdoor shows, would let you run in two-wheel drive. So, he tried to make it work. It just wasn't quite enough. John Moore with a smooth run, even though got a little bit of a rough start, comes back, takes the win.
Yeah, Army talks to John and Heidi here, and Heidi basically says, hey, when you can beat USA 1, that's a good win. And she's not lying, folks. That was a great run from John Moore, and it's going to put him in the semifinals.
Yeah, and Heidi, from what I understand, listening to some of the other podcasts, she was pretty much the one in charge here on a No Problem operation, and John was kind of just the driver. Yeah, she made sure that she was had everything right on that truck. She wasn't just a standby, a wife on the sidelines. She was involved with that truck, working on it, the bookings and all kind of stuff. And not to pick on John at all. He was certainly more than just a driver, but it was definitely a team effort from the whole family there. No problem.
Gravedigger and Outlaw is your next pair right here, and it seems like Dennis Anderson just can't get away from any of his rivals in this matchup. Round number 1, USA number 1 and Gravedigger. Now we're to the Outlaw and the Gravedigger, arguably Dennis's biggest rival from 89, late 88 on in TNT, really. Mike Wine right here. Like they say, another rivalry matchup. Outlaw stutters a little bit off the first set, though, here, Matt, and it looks like maybe there's something wrong with the truck as Dennis has just yet another point A to point B pass, and then the old red light bandit moves to the next round.
Yeah, you speak of the stutter here with the Outlaw. I'm going to keep an eye on the left lane here in the Gravedigger as we go green. You see Dennis almost stutters a little bit on the starting line, so we'll keep an eye on that throughout the rest of the night and what happens in the next round. But definitely an issue with the Outlaw here. Looks like he drops a drive shaft.
Yeah, Dennis says also that he noticed that Bigfoot's out of it, so he feels like he stands a pretty good chance of winning if he can keep it together. Army noticed a little fluid coming out of the back of the truck. Dennis just says, I burped a little air out of the radiator. It'll be all right. Chris Chapman says the drive shaft broke over the first set of cars, and hopefully Mike Wine will do better in Weed Sport, which is the next show on the tour, but unfortunately it's not going to be a televised show. Our hearts go out to Mike Wine right here. He really wanted to perform in his home, basically his home state of New Jersey, but it wasn't the Outlaws' night to be.
Yeah, and, even in a loss, the energy of Mike Wine does not stop. So it's always an entertaining interview. And, Mike is a super nice guy. If you ever get to meet him in person, he shows up at the International Monster Truck Hall of Fame here and there. So, great interview. And he always loves to get under that skin if he can of somebody. So I'm sure he's picking on Dennis still to this day somewhere.
Oh, yeah. There's no end to that man picking on Dennis Anderson, I think. We scroll into the semifinals here, and we've got King Crunch and Carolina Crusher, No Problem, and Gravedigger. And, Matt, this is kind of a mix between the trucks with the really high horsepower and the trucks that are very consistent on the tour.
Yeah, you can't really call a winner in either of these races because No Problem's running good. Dennis is running good. That's going to be a good matchup. And then the two Chevrolets of King Crunch and Carolina Crusher, they're both having great nights. So, both or all four of them, I guess, have been putting in good runs, smooth runs. I can't, put a winner down on paper before either of these matchups.
Well, King Crunch and Carolina Crusher is an interesting matchup to me because that was a semifinal pairing in bracket number 1 on day number 1 between these two guys right here. And it was a photo finish between them, and we are going to get the exact same thing right here in this race. This time, though, it's swinging to the odds of the yellow Chevrolet as Gary Porter gets just enough of a launch over the second set of cars to push the front portion of that bumper across the finish line ahead of King Crunch. One of the best races in TNT. I said it before earlier with the Digger USA 1 matchup. This one, just as good.
Oh, just as good, if not better. I mean, we get a little bit of mind games here from Gary in that left lane, trying to mess with Scott again. They talk about it on the racing radio live here, and then at the finish line, man, I'd have to maybe even call this the closest race of the weekend because Army comes over the radio and says they're looking at the video. It may even be a tie. It's that close.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence they're going to have to look at the videotape. And then day 1, I want to point this out. Gary Porter is actually interviewed as he's coming down from looking at this video replay. Scott's actually standing right there next to Gary as they're getting ready to do an interview with the winner. And as Army starts to talk, he gets the radio communication saying, hey, Gary Porter's your winner. And he says, all right, Gary, you're going to go to the finals. And they interview Scott Stevens right here. And Scott very graciously kind of bows out and says, hey, Gary got me.
Yeah, and you never know which way those calls are going to go. It's a super, super tight finish, and a lot of times TNT's timing tape was at a little bit different angle than what the TV cameras were, so I'm not sure if they had a little better look than we did here at home, but we had a pretty good angle at the finish line either way, and I'd still give the win to Carolina Crusher, but only literally by a couple inches.
Yeah, it was extremely close. It mirrored the USA 1 and Digger race from earlier in the bracket. It mirrored their race from the day before. But the one thing that I want to point out is the respect between these two individuals and how they both, in their respective races against one another, both accepted the loss and moved on.
Yeah, two guys that are out there to win, but when it comes down to it, there wasn't really any hard feelings between those guys, I guess. It's kind of hard to be mad at Gary Porter. He's such a nice guy, and when the cards didn't fall his way, Gary would bow out, and Scott does the same in return here.
Yep. Gravedigger, No Problem, your next pairing right here. And I want to point out, earlier in the night, after beating USA 1, I saved this for this part of the broadcast for a reason. Army's interviewing John Moore, and he basically says, you're not going to run against anybody that's going to run you any harder than that run right there. I wonder if Army didn't have a chance to look to see who No Problem was going to take on in the semifinals before he made that statement.
Maybe not, because I would have to give that nod to the Gravedigger. Nobody's going to run you harder than Dennis, and Dennis is on tonight, so you have to expect that he's going to get a good run as the top remaining qualifier left in the field. He's going to put himself into that left lane for the advantage as well.
Yeah, and John also says Dennis hasn't beaten him yet this year. Not sure how true that stat is. Sorry, John. But, man, when he has that card in his back pocket, though, that's a little bit of confidence for him. However, in Dennis's back pocket, even with all the bad luck that he's had, he's still got a lot of wins in his pocket that John Moore does not have. And you actually see it. Chris Chapman basically says, hey, John, you're noticeably shaken. Are you going to be okay? John just replies, I hope so.
Yeah, and then we get to the starting line here, and it's a good race for sure. And but I think it's at that right lane. John just gets down into that hole. It ends up being a truck length difference at the finish line.
A truck length difference, but again, left turn Clyde as Dennis launches really hard to the right. John has to make a hard evasive action to avoid Digger after that really bad bounce that Dennis gets on the cars. Dennis, I mean, they didn't really have the center line DQ rule, but if that would have been a Pender race, Dennis was probably DQ'd and John would have been going to the finals.
Yeah, the left turn Clyde was a little too late this time because Dennis gets into the catch cars. And you know what? I'm going to take another little step back here to the beginning of the race. And it's hard to tell in the replay because of the way they swoop in with the edit shot. But if you go back and look at it live, Dennis is creeping as the light goes green.
Yeah, that's something I pointed out to you a little bit earlier today as I was going through the notes and everything, just kind of preparing myself for this show. Dennis creeps forward very, very, it's so hard to notice, but his tires are moving before the light goes green. It's something that is more noticeable in the Trucks and Tractor Power episode than it is the Tough Tracks episode as far as the video quality goes. But
yeah.
And you can actually attest to this as far as the Trucks and Tractor Power episode, because you sent the link to me to that particular race from that particular episode. It's not like, in Tough Tracks, it looks like Dennis never stops moving, but in actuality, he does stop and then starts to creep again.
Well, I think Dennis is up on the converter. They have the audio at the starting line dialed down a little bit so we can't hear the trucks rev up. But I think Dennis is just up on the converter, and he's getting as much stall out of it as he can. I don't think he's trying to, jump the gun or anything. But if we get into the discussion about the rules at the time, it was if you moved at all, you were DQ'd. Equalizer got DQ'd in Memphis. I think it was night number 2. He left what I would call right as the light was turning green. Kind of timed the start out from the starter on his rhythm, but they DQ'd him there. But somebody didn't catch Dennis creeping on this one. He's able to go into the finals.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if anybody even really saw it. I mean, Dennis, the truck just absolutely barely moves. I mean, I caught it out of the corner of my eye and had to rewind it back several times just to make sure I saw what I saw.
Yeah, and you pointed it out to me here before we've recorded, and it's not much. I mean, we get into the Penda years later where you could move a couple feet before you broke the ET beam, and it was still legal. But in the TNT days, if you moved at all, they were going to call the red light on you. So I guess it's just something the officials either missed, or I don't know if the result had anything to do with whether they made the call or not. I'm not going to, put that in those guys' lap like that. I'm guessing they just missed it.
Yeah, I mean, they had to have just missed it right there. Dennis, it's kind of funny here. He says he's just going to hammer on him when he's referring to Gary Porter and how good of friends they are. But John Moore, to me, the funniest part of this whole thing is the fact that, yeah, no excuses. Dennis got him. But, hey, we can load this thing in one piece, and that's a good deal.
Yeah, and, we finish up the interview here with John Moore. And one of the famous sayings from Army, Scott takes it from him as we head into commercial. He says the finals, it could be a Donnybrook.
Yeah, Donnybrook, a sense of an uproar, a disorder, a heated argument between two friends in the final round. Carolina Crusher and Gravedigger, kind of the North Carolina rivalry. We get to finish it out here for Dennis. He started off with the big white truck with all the horsepower that he chased for so many years. Now he's taken on, he's beaten the Outlaw truck. He takes out No Problem, who claimed that he hadn't beaten, or Gravedigger hadn't beaten him all year. And now we move to the final round, and it's his old North Carolina buddy, Gary Porter, and him in the finals yet again together.
That's it. And you pulled the description exactly, the definition of a Donnybrook. It's between two friends, Gary and Dennis, traveling up and down the road together, helped each other out a lot. At this point, Gary's new truck is pretty much done, and Gary had been building Dennis's new chassis for Gravedigger 3 as well. Two friends going at it in the finals. The Carolina is going to win. It's just a matter of what end of the state. Is it going to be northern North Carolina, where Gary's at, or on the Outer Banks, where Dennis is? We go to commercial with that Donnybrook statement, and we come back to Chris Chapman introducing the Monster Smash finals. And before you get your word in edgewise, I'm just going to say again, I love the Monster Smash build-up.
Chris cues the dreadful music for the Monster Smash final. The little build up right here between these two. Again, I still say that they could have built this up a little bit more between these guys. Talked about they are rivals from a sense the same state, just one's from a little bit higher up in the state than the other. But the win's going to go down to Kill Devil Hills, North Carolina, and the Outer Banks, as Dennis Anderson's going to have a great final round race here against Gary Porter. He's going to pull away between No Man's Land and takes the win by about a truck length over Gary. What I noticed in this race, Matt, and I'm not sure if you noticed the same thing, is number one, Dennis is creeping again. And number two, the fact that when Dennis comes over the first set of cars, he actually gets a really good landing, which helps propel him through No Man's Land, while Gary does not. Gary's a little bit wheels up as Dennis lands wheels down.
Yeah, it's that old Fred Schaefer slingshot maneuver, that Barefoot will become so famous for. Dennis gets a really good run down that first set of cars off the off-ramp. And again, he is creeping just a little bit. I think he's up on the converter as much as he can get. But, when Scott Douglas says showtime, all bets are off, and Dennis makes it to the other end first.
Yep, Dennis Anderson gets the win right here, and he makes that hard left turn, but yet still ends up pushing the left front right into the trunk of one of these cars right here. They quickly cut to the points, and it looks like Bigfoot's only going to gain 9 points on equalizer, 548 equalizer to Bigfoot's 477. Following closely behind now is Gary Porter and Carolina Crusher at 464, King Crunch 442, Digger 318, even with the win, still sitting solidly fifth in the standings. Right behind him, USA 1 jumps past Awesome Kong, 276, USA 1's 280, Nightlife 267, Outlaw 245, and Buffalo Trimmer rounding out your top 10 at 206.
Yeah, we finished the show kind of in a hurry here with the points wrap up, and it's a tremendous opportunity for Bigfoot to cut into Equalizer's lead, but he only shaves off 9 points between being the top qualifier and making it into round 2. USA 1 makes it into the 6th spot, and we move then to a winner's interview with Dennis Anderson.
Yep, Dennis basically said, I told Gary tonight he better tighten up every string in that old Chevrolet because Digger's going to put him down. And that's exactly what Dennis did. He goes out there. Dennis says it's been a long time, but really it's only been a month or so since his last win in Richmond. I think maybe Dennis thought that it had been a long time since he'd ran that well and that dominant in a particular bracket, not losing a race the entire night and not getting any fluke wins to really get himself to the finals. This was Dennis Anderson's Gravedigger performing at exactly what it is, 100% that particular evening.
Yeah, Dennis was on point, and he finishes the event with no further damage that we can tell. Dennis got to be happy about that. He makes sure to get his product sponsors in there during the interview, which he does a pretty good job of in 1990. Anytime he's on the podium there winning, he tries to get the sponsors in, which is good. And it's kind of a wrap on the show.
Dennis Anderson's storyline, though, for 1990 is not quite over yet, Matt, as we go into a TNT timing tape from the very next episode of Tough Tracks, and we see that where we would normally interview the winner of the race from the previous week's show, actually standing there with Andy Brass, who raced Dennis in Middletown, New York, and ends up Dennis has a very hard crash right there racing against Bigfoot 8. The TNT timing tape, though, is mislabeled, though, and you're going to have to pronounce the name. I still can't do it.
Yeah, they label it as Canandaigua, New York, which was actually the night after Middletown. Canandaigua, they always ran the infield. I verified some of this with Bart Maimone. He was at the show every single year back then, and we did some discussing a few years ago. Nick Davis and a couple other guys. I was trying to figure out what was going on, and turns out it is from Middletown. So Canandaigua was the night after. These shows were all back to back. I think this was the 18th of July, this Flemington show. On the 20th they were in Middletown, and then the next day I think they were in Canandaigua. I may have my dates just a hair off there by a day or two, but it ends up putting Dennis out for the rest of the season, they say, on tough tracks. But we're in West Leb here a few days later, and he doesn't make it back for Stafford or for the finals in Louisville. But in reality, Dennis got the truck fixed, and I'll give a shout out to Dalton Hastings here. He recently put a video together of Dennis's entire 1990 season. By the end of August, Dennis has the truck back together, and just a couple miles down from where the Digger's Dungeon is now, in Harbinger, North Carolina, Dennis turns the truck over at a mud race trying to do a long jump over a set of cars. And then Dennis gets the truck fixed again and goes on a long tour of the Pacific Northwest. And the weekend of the TNT finals, I believe he was in Molalla, Oregon. So they said Dennis crashed out for the season, but that wasn't entirely the truth. I'm not sure if the TNT buyout had anything to do with that, where they, let Dennis go out and try to get paid off elsewhere in the meantime so he could get ready for 91, get the new truck together, because USHRA and SRO, they did buy some interest in Dennis already at that point. The TNT had left over with Digger 2. So we not really sure, what the situation was, if Dennis could get more money on the West Coast, but that's where he spent a good portion of the rest of the season on a big tour up there. And that's the story of Dennis's end of 1990.
A couple things I want to point out here before we completely close out the show is, number one, this race between Digger 2 and Bigfoot 8. Dennis's leaf-sprung truck keeps up with, and I mean within a half a truck length, almost beats the truck of the future straight up on this straight line course right here. Dennis does get the bad bounce, and he does make the left front kiss the left rear when he hits that wall right there. But man, if they would have raced each other in Flemington, this is probably how the race would have ended. And it would have been one of those races where people were standing up and cheering and stomping their feet afterwards, because this race right here, I wish, Matt, that we had audio from it.
Oh, for sure. And, it seems like any time that Dennis went up into that New York area, he had the truck on kill every time. I'm just flashing back to memories of West Leb in 89. He takes some bonsai shots. Buffalo, he does the moon shot that's so famous from the Tough Tracks video.
Yeah, Weed Sport in 89 as well, when he beats Bigfoot 4.
Weed Sport, he's pushing it. And if the truck was running, he was pushing it hard in those New York shows. And it seemed like he didn't back off for 1990. Ends up taking a pretty bad hit there in Middletown and can't finish the tour out. But like I said, gets the truck back together and then rolls it back together again, finish out the season. And
there is video of that out there, by the way, as far as that rollover goes for Dennis right after they get this truck fixed.
And Dalton does have it in his year recap video if you want to go check it out as well. So and then we're transitioning into the TNT buyout phase here through the end of July and early August, where the news starts spreading that SRO had bought TNT, and Gravedigger, as far as I can tell, makes its USHRA debut in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in November of 1990. That's where Digger 2 pops up for the first time in USHRA competition that I've seen anyway. So not sure who was driving, if Dennis was driving or if Les was already in the truck, because that was around the time Dennis came out with Digger 3. But just an interesting transition. A lot of things and a lot of moving parts are happening quickly here in the monster truck industry at this time.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to point out, too, is I very vaguely remember, and I could be wrong, people can shoot me in this comment section for this or not, I want to say in one of the Louisville shows, Army Armstrong kind of chastises Dennis a little bit, saying Dennis is too busy playing over on the West Coast.
Yeah, Dennis may have been playing on the West Coast, but he was getting a handsome payday every time he went out there. That's why he was doing it, TNT's points fund was pretty good for the points winners if you were up in the standings, but if you were down toward the bottom, I don't think you were getting quite as much. And I'm sure that Dennis is probably getting better show money going out there and running for Dave Matthews and some of the other guys out west than he was getting a 6th, 8th place points check from TNT.
Yeah, and that's probably very true as well. Like we said, this was the last win. It kind of a weekend of last wins for trucks, if you want to say that, Matt. I mean, for USA sure. 1 wins the day before. Never see that truck win again on television. This is the last win for Gravedigger and TNT Motorsports in Flemington right here in one of the most action-packed brackets that we've covered on this show, really. As far as wrapping things up here, though, Flemington was one heck of a weekend of racing. I have to say it. A name and a place that you may not think of, yet again producing some fantastic monster truck racing.
It really was, and I think I'm gonna give myself a first here on the Retro Monster Truck review, and I'm gonna say that this event's a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the racing here, the interviews, the way everything is done, the way everything is conducted, the drama, the build-up. Honestly, 10 out of 10 for this episode. And last week, I think we both rated it about a 9. So 19 altogether for Flemington out of a perfect 20. There you go.
The build-up, especially for the Monster Smash Final, is what gets it a solid 10 out of 10 for me.
Don't make me smack you.
So yeah, I mean, a great weekend overall. Some exciting competition. We're winding down toward the end of the TNT season. Some craziness will happen in West Lebanon and Stafford. Maybe you'll be able to cover some of those events with myself or somebody else, one of the contributors here on the Retro Monster Truck Review. Be sure to donate blood. Josh, thank you again for having me on the show, and we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thanks again for listening. And always remember, we'll see you again on the tracks across America.